Gentle readers, welcome to Everything is Everything. I'm Amit and this is my good friend Ajay. And today what we've decided to do is that, people think of papers as really boring. People will think of things written in the 19th century and they will be like, why do we need to know, etc., etc. Just sit down with a good paperback novel and have a thrilling ride. But what we are going to do today is talk about 5 papers, or actually some of them can also be called essays, which are dear to us, that we feel are seminal, that change the way we look at the world, and that are also incredibly well written, thrilling. And in a sense, I would say that they crafted the modern world. I mean, these are incredible papers. So that's what we're going to do today. So Ajay, this is going to be a little bit of a surprise to me as well, because I haven't prepped for the papers you're going to talk about, though of course I'm familiar with the broad details of them. So I'm going to ask you layman-like questions perhaps in between. But what's the first paper you'd like to talk about?
I want to talk about The Role of Monetary Policy by Milton Friedman, which appeared in 1968.
So why is this such an important paper? We all know what an important figure Milton Friedman is and so on and so forth. Tell me a little bit more, because just the term monetary policy, for the lay reader, it's like, yeah, kya hai? Why do we need to
And
know?
also, I probably read thousands of papers in macro, and why does this one shine through? Why does it light up the journey of the 20th century? Okay, it's a very interesting story. So there was a grand evolution of macroeconomics through the 20th century. Okay, it began at the Great Depression, where John Maynard Keynes practically invented the concept of macroeconomics. The idea of thinking of a country, of an economy, as a unit of observation was not there meaningfully prior to him. And in the fires of the Great Depression, Keynes invented a whole intellectual toolkit and was a valuable and an important figure in problem solving and in being part of the real world policy solutions of that period. And I admire the person, and he's a complicated person because a lot of his thinking was done in English, and it's actually a little hard to understand the full logic of what was sought to be done. Many reductionist algebraic versions of Keynes don't get the subtlety. So there is a lot of thought and merit there, and also it was based on Great Depression conditions where there was a certain here and now that we have to solve the world around us. And I feel those ideas don't port necessarily well into the coming years. Keynesian economics was the dominant paradigm, and it involved a certain package. It involved a package where government could manage the business cycle, that business cycles were solvable through using fiscal policy largely. Monetary policy was relegated to some low importance. And there was a great deal of thinking that people are a little dumb. Okay? So there's a critical element of that whole worldview, that the policymakers are wise and all-knowing, and the policymakers will do some things, and the people are more or less dumb and they are far away and they actually don't know what we are doing, and they will behave in certain ways regardless of what the policy people are trying to do. Okay, this is the part of the Keynesian paradigm, that we don't take the people seriously. We are not thinking that individual economic agents are solving maximizations and are thinking for themselves. And in its heyday in the 50s, there was a lot of optimism and confidence that we've licked the business cycle, we've solved this, there will be big fiscal policy, the government will manage the up and down of the business cycle, and we are done, we are sorted. And through the 60s, this started coming apart. There's a very famous Kennedy tax cut in 1964 in the United States, where really it didn't work, that people thought they have all these models and forecasts and all that. And there was a big tax cut that was supposed to have done certain things, and it didn't really work. And many elements of that macro package were starting to fall apart in the 60s. And the 60s was a time of social and economic strife. In that moment, in 1968, Friedman got the appointment that he was president of the American Economic Association, and that gave him the platform to do a speech. And in that speech, he told a story. And he told a story around what is monetary policy, what monetary policy can do, and a whole framework on how to think about these questions. And I'm just going to narrate some pieces out of that. He took us closer to thinking about the people as optimizers, that you don't just sit and think that the people are dumb, that when there is an action by a government, there is a response by the people. People change their behavior in response to the actions of government. And he constantly, para after para, he brings back this to the fore, where he starts saying that, but if the government did this, this would happen, this would happen, this would happen. And so playing through the consequences. Whereas before him, a lot of people were kind of running some regressions and pretending those relationships were stable. So yeah, you can have some data set and you can fit a model, but you should not assume that those relationships are stable. He articulated a concept of a natural rate of unemployment, i.e. the rate of unemployment that is consistent with an inflation that is not changing dramatically. So there will always be some unemployment in the world. Some people are switching jobs, some people have been laid off, some people have chosen to step out of the labor force. So there will always be X% that are out of job, and you shouldn't think that you can drive the unemployment rate to zero. There is something below which it can't really go without driving the inflation to hell. And he took us on this whole journey about thinking about the role of monetary policy. What can monetary policy do? What can monetary policy not do? And he pulled us away from the Keynesian conception that monetary policy has been relegated to some unimportant role. And at the same time, he had a very nice modern way of thinking that monetary policy can not screw up. So it can produce conditions of macroeconomic stability. Don't allow inflation to go up, don't allow inflation to go down. And beyond that, there's not a whole lot that monetary policy can do. It's not some discretionary tool that you can really use, that you can have some limited use of monetary policy in society to preserve the value of the currency in a stable and predictable way, and don't try to do more than that, that don't go after ambitious goals. Okay, so it's a very nice story written in plain English, and it had a remarkable impact on the world. One lucky thing or good thing or prescient thing was that right after he did the speech, for the next 10-15 years, a lot of the old style macro policy did not really work very well. You had the great problems of the 70s, you had the inflation of the 70s, and all these things just clicked that that was the kind of thing he was talking about. So it was a good speech at the right time, and it came out right in hindsight. And equally importantly, a whole new paradigm of macroeconomics came about, mostly led by one person named Robert E. Lucas and his collaborators, Tom Sargent, Ed Prescott, a whole bunch of others, where they started taking these ideas and formalizing them and turning them into simple, clean models and estimable things which could be brought to the data. Sometimes this is called the Lucas program. So the Lucas program is to try to build a macroeconomics where there are individuals and firms who are optimizing, who are not dumb, who are not just blindly living by fixed rules, but you change the interest rate, they'll change their behavior. You change the tax rate, they'll change their behavior. And this has become the entire machinery of modern economics. And I also want to end this chunk by saying that, not in this speech narrowly, but I also want to point out that Friedman's reasoning and understanding of the Great Depression is the source of the second pillar of modern macroeconomics, which is understanding the role of finance. That when the banking system blows up, it can take an economy down with it. And Friedman showed us how that happened in the Great Depression. And Ben Bernanke worked out a lot of the details. And I think that the world came out mildly in the 2008 crisis. And that was the triumph of these two schools of thought. So these two pieces where Friedman was really at the heart of it, of thinking about modern ways to do macroeconomics, of understanding the role of monetary policy, of understanding the role of finance. And it was really the amazing achievement in the United States that Ben Bernanke was put to run the Fed at a time like that. And I feel that there is an objective sense in which the world has become a better place by putting monetary policy inside the bottle, where today all the sensible countries in the world, they run an inflation target. That's a Friedmanite view of monetary policy. But you should be accountable. You should deliver on an inflation target. By delivering price stability, you stabilize the lives of the people. You encourage long-term planning by the people. You don't do a whole lot, but you know what? This is a lot. That you do this much and you're making a very good contribution. So all over the world, we have seen inflation targeting emerge. In India, we got to inflation targeting in 2015, and it has made a huge difference in terms of simplifying and stabilizing the Indian economy. And all this comes from Milton Friedman in general, and I think of this article as a turning point in the history of the macroeconomics of the 20th century, both in the plane of ideas and in the plane of action.
It's time for some BTS. You know what is BTS?
BTS.
Behind the scenes footage.
Okay.
Here, gentle reader, watch this.
Trouble Ajay.
Shout inflation targeting is nonsense.
Can you shout that?
I
Shout it.
won't
Shout
shout
it.
it. No, you shout inflation targeting is nonsense.
Vaishnav, will you do it?
क्या?
Shout.
Inflation targeting is nonsense.
How can I tell you, Amit, inflation target is nonsense?
You see what I have to go through.
Yeah, so you you see what Ajay has to kind of go through, and I should tell gentle readers that Ajay was one of a handful of people fighting for inflation targeting a decade before it actually happened in India. KP Krishnan and Ajay were like lone warriors in a sense. I have a great 8-hour episode with KP Krishnan where he talks about this in detail, so congratulations for that. But I want to sort of ask you to demystify two terms which you've used very casually as if everybody knows what they are. But I want you to demystify it. You said fiscal policy, monetary policy. What is the difference? What is monetary policy? You know, tell me in language that any layperson would understand.
In many places, there is a central bank. A central bank invents money. Okay, it makes money out of thin air. Okay, just like the Bitcoin and Ethereum folk do. A central bank imagines money, and we all agree with each other that we are going to use this money. A central bank gets to control the short-term interest rate of the economy. So think of the overnight interest rate that you are going to borrow money from me. That price is determined by the central bank. The central bank stands ready to borrow or lend infinite amounts from the overnight market. So that way they control the overnight price. They have market power on that market, and they control the overnight interest rate for you borrowing to me. That decision is called monetary policy. So controlling the short-term interest rate of the economy is called monetary policy. At heart, that's what every central bank does. Many central banks think that they ought to do 5 other things, but modern macroeconomics is about understanding that actually a central bank can only do one thing and should only do one thing, which is control the overnight interest rate in a way that delivers on a predictable, stable inflation target. So in India, monetary policy is the game where RBI is supposed to make forecasts about the economy and choose the overnight rate in a way that will generate 4% inflation. That is the inflation target, and RBI is accountable. And you and me, we the people, are supposed to look at the inflation rate and say, hey Mr. RBI, what did you do? So you hold them accountable. That is monetary policy.
RBI को भी आपने मिस्टर बना दिया. So I vaguely from memory remember this quote which I think is from Friedman, that inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. And what what the central bank is effectively doing through this mechanism is it is controlling the money supply, right?
It's complicated. So there was a great journey of ideas. If you read Friedman 1968, it is conducted in terms of money supply. In the early 80s, in the advanced economies, it was understood that given the nature of the modern financial system, given the sophistication of the modern financial system, it's impossible to measure and control money supply. So we've just given up on that. We've backed out and we've set interest rates. So Friedman was wrong on emphasizing money supply. But the rest of the Friedmanite package, the rest of the Friedmanite philosophy goes through. You just have to switch from control of the money supply to control of the interest rate.
And money supply is still a good proxy in terms of thought, of thinking about this.
They're related, but with the development of modern computerized financial systems, money supply moves too much, it fluctuates too much, so it's a poor thing to control. Whereas interest rates are clean and simple and visible and controllable. So what is monetary policy? It is a government organization, the central bank, given a mandate by the parliament to do infinite trading in the short-term money market, which gives them control of the short-term interest rate so that they deliver on an inflation target. They are held accountable to deliver on the inflation target. And the better central banks do nothing else. They have no other objectives. They don't try to play complicated games. This is it. They're a simple utility. They perform this function. There is no mystique of central banking. There is just a service that is performed under the aegis of a parliamentary law. Fiscal policy is about the deficit that is run by the government. And again, you could have a simple non-discretionary fiscal policy. By and large, it seems that once every 10-20 years, when there is a big disaster, there is merit in a discretionary fiscal policy. So my view of what is the right way to do fiscal policy is run a small primary balance every year, be boring, be non-discretionary. But when a 2008 crisis comes along, run a large fiscal deficit. When a pandemic comes along, run a large fiscal deficit. And buy space for these luxuries of an occasional large deficit by running a small surplus every year. Okay, that is fiscal policy. So these are the two levers of modern macroeconomics. Amit, tell us, what is your favorite paper that you want to talk about today?
So you mentioned Friedman, you mentioned Keynes, and I'm going to bring up another character in this kind of play, and as the great Friedrich Hayek. And I want to talk about the use of knowledge in society, which I consider the greatest essay of the 20th century. And that's a biased view, but it had a huge impact on me and actually a huge impact on the field of economics. A little bit about Hayek first, because his biography is interesting. He was born at the end of the last century, I think 1899 or so on. And early in his life, he had a couple of formative influences, but the main one is that he served in World War I. He saw battle. Part of the hearing in his left ear was damaged in 1917 because of an attack somewhere. And in 1918, he also survived the Great Spanish Flu. Right? So now, in our times, we are so relatively lucky that we have lived through tranquil decades where nothing traumatic has happened to us. You know, even in an Indian context, you know, partition is so far away, and emergency was when I was a little kid and I don't remember. So, you know, our generation and whatever comes later, we've seen times of remarkable peace where we are, right? And Hayek goes through World War I, goes through the Spanish flu, comes out of it at the other side. I think he was the second cousin of Wittgenstein. He actually read Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, Wittgenstein's great book, before it was published. And they served together in World War I. So apparently during World War I, they were talking. And this is completely unrelated, but once on Twitter, I came across Wittgenstein's diaries. And you think, what a great philosopher, what he must be writing about when he is in the trenches. And in the trenches, he is just basically writing about wanting to masturbate and wanting sex. That's what the great Wittgenstein is doing during World War I. But regardless, Hayek then gets into academics, goes to the London School of Economics, gets into democratic socialism, gets into Marxism, but eventually reads the book Socialism by Ludwig von Mises and finds himself becoming a classical liberal and becomes a great warrior in those ideas. Among the people he contests time and again is Keynes over a period of time. There are these great rap videos we'll link in the show notes, co-written by Russ Roberts of Econ Talk, who's been a guest on The Seen and the Unseen as well. Wonderful man. And so it's like two sort of polar schools of thought, but Keynesian thought is dominating. Keynes is, you know, the big figure of that time. And in 1944, Hayek comes out with this great book called The Road to Serfdom. And the road to serfdom, the central idea of the road to serfdom is that if you do central planning, that kind of authoritarianism will inevitably lead to serfdom, as it were, right? And he lays that path out, and it's a brilliant book. It's a bestseller. At one point, it is hard to get copies of it, not just because it's a bestseller, but there's a shortage of paper during the war. So Hayek himself can't get a copy. But, so that's huge. And this particular paper that I am talking about comes out in 1945. And Hayek, by the way, went on to be a great influence on Friedman as well. Though one of the things they disagreed on, I think, was monetary policy, if I remember correctly. And the biographer of both Hayek and Keynes went on to say that Hayek was actually in person closer to Keynes than to Friedman, which to me is actually really a delightful anecdote, that your friends can be people you disagree with, which I absolutely love. So the few times you and I disagree, Ajay, Shah, I don't worry about our friendship at all, right? So the use of knowledge in society now was written as a rebuttal of a proposal by the economist Oscar Lange, who said that we should have a central pricing board. CPB, lovely acronym, which will set the prices for everything, and it was a call for central planning. And at this point, gentle readers, I would like to point to you that when people think of Hayek, they think Salma Hayek. When people think of Lange, they think Jessica Lange. No, you do not need to think about those figures. You need to think about Friedrich Hayek and ignore Oscar Lange completely. So anyway, the essay was, instantly a huge hit, had an impact. There was an economist called Armin Armin Alkian, who is known as Armenia's Adam Smith, who would, when he read the paper, he would stop people in the hallway or wherever he was, whichever university, and say, "Have you read this? You have to read this." This was an impact. It had a massive impact through the decades. Tyler Cowen had a sort of a recent interview with Lex Friedman where he spoke about what that essay meant to him. It was one of the three works of literature that he picked out as important to him. So just massive kind of importance. Now let me tell you about the essay itself, where he is it's a rebuttal to Lange, and he's saying that, look, central planners seem to behave as if the central problem is a problem of logic, or what I would interpret as an algorithm. That if you get all the data of the world, what is the logic that we use? What is the algorithm that we use? He didn't use this word. What is the algorithm that we use by which we, order society, as it were? And this is a central problem, and they behave in this way, and it is foolish to behave in this way because the knowledge of the world is so dispersed that you cannot possibly get this data. Sometimes even I do not know what my desires will be tomorrow, and even I cannot articulate my spending habits. There'll be different small businesses all over the place functioning in different ways, and things are changing all the time. In the last episode when we spoke about power, you have sort of mentioned that things change so fast that suddenly you have a cloudy day, people switch off their ACs, and at night the AC usage goes up because it is warmer. You cannot predict those things. There are all those millions of little fragmented things happening in little ways. So central planning cannot work. And there is a great passage where he sums this up. If we can agree that the economic problem of society is mainly one of rapid adaptation to changes in the particular circumstances of time and place, it would seem to follow that the ultimate decisions must be left to the people who are familiar with these circumstances and who know directly of the relevant changes and of the resources immediately available to meet them. We cannot expect that this problem will be solved by first communicating all this knowledge to a central board, which after integrating all knowledge issues orders. We must solve it by some form of decentralization. Stop quote. And now the question is, fine, decentralization, but what is that form of decentralization? How can I, sitting in Mumbai, coordinate my actions with, say, a trader in Ludhiana or a farmer in Bengal somewhere, and all of us want different things. All of us, in a sense, are interconnected in this vast economy. We can't communicate our knowledge to each other in any meaningful way. We cannot even absorb it. How do we do it? And the answer is a miraculous answer of prices. Prices carry information. That information tells you, gives you knowledge that you might otherwise not have. Somewhere there is a factory disruption because there was an earthquake, and therefore the supply of tin has gone down. Now, typically, I don't know about it, and I'm not incentivized to stop using that particular product because that shortfall has taken place. But the prices rise because obviously the supply goes down, and therefore I know ki yaar, let's economize. Let me spend my money on something else. So prices are the way that all of us coordinate. And the more you think about this, the more freaking miraculous it is. Like another great essay I love is I Pencil by Leonard Reed, where he puts together the insights of Adam Smith's Invisible Hand and Hayek's use of knowledge in society. And it's, the essay begins with the words, if I remember correctly, I am a lead pencil, right? And then it talks about where its component parts come from. And I particularly remember this memorable line. I, pencil, am a complex combination of miracles, a tree, zinc, copper, graphite, and so on. But to these miracles which manifest themselves in nature, an even more extraordinary miracle has been added, the configuration of creative human energies. Millions of tiny know-hows configurating naturally and spontaneously in response to human necessity and desire, and in the absence of any human masterminding. And this is brilliant. This is like, we take it for granted, but if you sit back and think about this for a moment, prices are miraculous. If they were a human invention per se, if some great central planner said, before there were prices, before there was a barter system, ki aisa karte hai, he would have been considered one of the greatest thinkers in human history. So it is miraculous, and it demonstrates something called spontaneous order. Right? We are instinctively wired to think of the world in top-down ways, as if everything has to be planned and designed. But as Adam Ferguson memorably said, a lot of beautiful things in the world are the product of human action, but not human design. right? And spontaneous order is a term that you can apply to them. How do languages evolve? Central committees don't come together and put languages together. Languages evolve because millions of people use words in different ways and they clash against each other and they come together and so on and so forth. Matt Ridley has this great book called The Evolution of Everything. I did a great episode with him as well. And in that, he talks beautifully about how everything beautiful in the world is actually bottom up, natural selection. You and I sitting here and a tree behind you, we are all products of spontaneous order, which is natural selection. There's no planner, there's no God, though that is a subject for another day. But it's all these beautiful processes playing out. And this is just completely fundamental to the way we should think about the world. And even today, so many people drunk on power especially have this engineering mindset that we can design this, we can do that, we can coordinate this, we can coordinate that. And a lot of the time, the state just needs to get out of the way. There are mechanisms such as the mechanism of prices, which is so powerful as to almost be miraculous. And gentle readers, just stop for a moment and think about what prices actually do, how they order society. I think Friedrich Bastiat, one of my heroes, and I'll talk about him more later, once spoke about how do you feed the city of Paris. If a central planner had to do it, there is no freaking way. कि कितने अंडे मंगवाने हैं, and where are we going to grow upma, though I don't think anyone in Paris has upma. But you cannot coordinate everyone's desires and whatever. But miraculously, every morning the people in Paris have breakfast, right? Because there is a price system, everything is prices, people economize when they need to, etc., etc. So it's so beautiful that, as you can see, I'm becoming a little incoherent here and you're just waxing eloquent about this, so I shall turn over to you.
No. When you pause to think about it, we are moved to rapture. It's the only reasonable response, because when you pause to think about it, just think about the magic of billions of people, no central controller, each one solving their own optimization, figuring out what is good for themselves. And prices are the information. So each one looks at the price and behaves. That's all. And the world gets ordered. It is nothing less than miraculous.
So Ajay, what's your second paper?
My second paper is the 1937 article by Ronald Coase called The Nature of the Firm. This is something that he did. He was a law thinker, was not even an economist. Okay, he got a Nobel Prize in economics.
Everything is everything.
Yeah, and he got a Nobel Prize in economics, and it's absolutely great. And the advantage of being an outsider was he did not take to the vocabulary and the modeling strategies of the economists for free. He curiously wondered, why does this make sense? So the puzzle to which he applied himself was about, why is it that we simultaneously have a world of prices and bargains and negotiations and contracts on one hand, which is a normal story of economics, and then at the same time you have a firm where you put a boundary wall around the firm, and inside the firm we don't bargain, we don't negotiate, we establish an organization chart and authority is distributed and there's a great deal of obedience and people fall in line. So inside a firm people fall in line, but outside the firm, the dealings of the firm outside are the complexity and the chaos of prices, contracts, negotiations, bargains. Okay, so why is there this separation of one kind of behavior inside a firm and a very different kind of behavior outside the firm? And he got to thinking about the word, the boundary of the firm, that where do we draw the boundary of the firm? And his insight, his logic is something like this, that he tells a story that contracting is costly. Okay, it is costly for us to bargain. It is costly for us to arrive at a deal, to arrive at a contract terms. Okay, all of us have been through it. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes emotional energy. Sometimes, with friends, it's difficult to do contracting. And you arrive at a term sheet that this is the way we'll do the contract. Then you have to expend lawyering costs to turn it into a document. And then the day the document is signed, the universe starts misbehaving and doing strange things. It takes you outside the zone of that contract. Then once again, you have to have the deep sigh and do a renegotiation and say to the guy, I know the contract said that, but you agree under these circumstances, it would make no sense at all for you to behave like this. Come on, let's be friends. Let's overcome this. So you have to end up doing contract renegotiation all the time. Contracting is costly. Okay, so on one hand, contracting and negotiation and fluctuations of prices and every deal is up for grabs. It can be negotiated, but it comes at a friction. It comes at a cost of transacting. Within a firm, you basically fight off the costs of transaction. So at the simplest case, there is a employer that hires an employee, and then the employee wakes up every morning, boss says, do this for me today. Now you're not negotiating. We're not negotiating the price. We're not negotiating what has to be done. We're just getting ahead and doing the work. Okay, and that's very efficient. So that's the way to think about it, that inside a firm, we operate in a different way. It is a centrally planned way. Every firm has a power structure and a distribution of power, and we can debate about whether to be more centralized, less centralized, decentralized. Okay, and actually we've had 2 episodes of Everything is Everything around precisely these ideas. We've had 1 episode about the problem of concentrated power at a CEO and how the game is to disperse that power and create more check and balance inside the firm. We've had another episode about decentralization, that when you think about a subcontinent the size of India, a firm would not be wise in imposing one single product and one single process design on the whole country. It instead needs more bottom-up evolution of ideas inside itself. So then the firm has to rejig itself to not be so Stalinist inside, but to create power centers all over the firm where there are decision-making authorities for East UP and West UP and so on. All this is inspired from this starting point. So for me personally, it was Coase who opened my mind to thinking about the market economy. Think of a market economy as atomic individuals, one person trading with another person. We're all self-employed. We're all talking, bargaining, negotiating, contracting. And then inside that, you get these little fortresses of firms. And Coase taught us that what is a successful firm, what is the optimal size of the firm, is where these trade-offs balance out. That on one hand, it's very efficient to be inside a firm in a centrally controlled thing, in a centrally planned thing. But on the other hand, you lose that flexibility of how markets work. And there are trade-offs in both ways. So this is a 1937 article and a seminal milestone to starting to think about firms. Not just the firm is some black box that maximizes profit, but a firm is a complicated, messy thing inside. And let's start understanding the firm.
I want to start understanding you, because you just said, and I'll show you hand gestures which are very interesting. You said, and gentle reader, you will see Ajay on the screen doing this simultaneously. Imagine the firm where everybody is fighting. Why did you do these? It's very interesting. I want to kind of know.
A physical perimeter, a boundary,
Yeah,
a
where
fort
everybody
wall.
is fighting. There,
Yeah,
people
and
fight
inside
like
that,
this.
they're all at each other's throats.
You fight like this. Okay, so one quick aside I'll add before I get to my question. And the quick aside is that, people will often say that a firm is so autocratic, and if you're okay with working in a firm, why are you not okay with autocratic leaders and all that? To which I will say that, listen, I join a firm out of voluntary action. I sign an employment contract with a firm. If I am not happy, I can leave as per the terms of the contract. So when people call corporate work modern slavery, I'm like, no way. Everybody who's in a firm is there voluntarily. It is the best option open to them of all possible options. It's so honorable. My really brief question, as the light is going, my really brief question is that in modern times, where transaction costs can be so much lower and new ways of working have come up, and we have the gig economy and all of that, is that nature of the firm as defined by Coase kind of changing, in the sense that all the principles obviously apply, but how differently do you think Coase would have thought of the firm today?
Yeah. So what you say is absolutely correct, that as transactions costs change, as the ability for people to work together in new ways emerges, then you should rethink the concept of the firm. That is the essence of Coase, saying that the firm is a rational solution to a problem. And as the technological landscape of collaboration and contracting changes, then what may have been a great solution 20 years ago is not a good solution today. So I think there are 2 levels of innovation taking place. The modern open source world, we had an episode on Unix, we talked about free software. It has been held up as a novel solution to the Coase problem, where you had companies making software and now you have loose coalitions of individuals making software. And in some ways it works very well, and it is really a different line of attack to getting to the same creative act, but without the burden of being inside a firm. So these things can and should be rethought. And similarly, our entire conversations around centralized power in a firm are a reminder that it doesn't have to be a Stalinist firm where power is concentrated in a CEO. The better firms are actually creatively rethinking, reimagining power. The great firms actually are institutions. People come and people go. Okay, so a good firm like Hindustan Lever has many changes of CEO, but the fundamental character of the firm does not change because it is an institution. It has dispersed power. There are many autonomous thinking, decision-making units inside a firm like Hindustan Lever. It's not a single person autocracy. So these are all questions that are opened up through the inquiry of Coase 1937.
And what strikes me about this paper is not necessarily the conclusion of it or the subject of it. I don't, even if you don't care about firms, even if one day firms exist in a completely different design, it doesn't matter. What strikes me about this paper and all good economic work is the thinking behind it, that these are foundational principles, this is a frame you bring, this is how you think about something. And what the specific conclusion of a specific paper at a particular point in time is not so important. I think every great paper of economics is teaching us how to think about life and live our lives better, and that's so beautiful.
And Amit, tell us, our fourth and last paper of the day. What's something lovely that you read that shaped you and brought you where you are today?
Our gentle readers will now say at the beginning of the episode, we were promised 5, why only 4? Because the light is going down. And this reminds me, the light going down, of this great essay written in the middle of the 19th century called the Candlemaker's Petition, one of the greatest pieces of satire ever. The Candlemaker's Petition was written by Friedrich Bastiat, and it was basically a petition from candlemakers to the government saying, block the sun. It is affecting our business. If you block the sun, then more candles will sell. And this is, it's such a beautiful satire on protectionist tendencies which we are surrounded by to this day. Now, Friedrich Bastiat is one of my heroes, born I think 1799 and died, born 1801 and died 1850 at the age of 49. And great essayist, a member of parliament for some time, I think, and an absolute classical liberal, fan of Adam Smith, member of the Austrian School of Economics and so on, early procedure. And what you see in a lot of Bastiat's essays at that time is thinking that we are familiar with today because of scholarly work that happened decades later. But it was Bastiat who was first stating it, and not just stating it, but stating it in simple language that absolutely anyone could understand. It blows my mind. And he was not just a great thinker in terms of writing essays. He would travel around popularizing his work. In fact, that's kind of why he died, because he did a book tour in the US and he got tuberculosis. And at one point he realized he was dying. And at that point, he said something to the effect of, till my dying breath, I will scream out my principles with all the power in my lungs. Tuberculosis lungs, right? So deeply moving, but that's the kind of man that he was. And the Candlemaker's Petition is a great work. Another great work which you must read is available for free. We are going to link it in the show notes. And when I do this, I mean in the show notes below the YouTube screen and not below where I am sitting, because there is grass and there is fresh earth, is The Law, which is again a masterpiece. If you want to understand the modern state, you have to read that work written in the middle of the 19th century. Brilliant. The essay I want to talk about is dear to me. It's called That Which Is Seen and That Which Is Not Seen, right? And that's where I got the title of my podcast, The Seen and the Unseen. And the essay begins by asking you to imagine a scenario. And the scenario is this, that somewhere there is a gentleman, someone picked up a stone and threw the stone at his window, and the window is broken. It is a broken window. And then other people around give gyan, give commentary. And they say the broken window is good for the economy, because now the glazier will get 6 francs from, whoever's window it was. And money is moving in the economy, there is activity, and this is great. And here Bastiat steps in and he says, Mr. Gas, be quiet, using one of your phrases from a previous episode. Hey, Mr. Gas, keep quiet. And he talks about what is seen and what is not seen. First order effects, second order effects. What is seen is that the glazier is making 6 francs, the economy is doing well. What is not seen is what the owner of that window would have done with the 6 francs had he not had to give it to the glazier. And the two examples Bastiat gives us, he would have bought a shoe or he would have bought a book. So the economy is benefiting and now you have lost that. So when a window is broken, you see that money is going somewhere. You don't see what else would have been done with that money. And what is this? This is a concept of opportunity cost about 60 years before the term was coined, right? Just a deep insight. In the rest of his essay, Bastiat talks about things like taxes. What is the opportunity cost? The government takes money from us and spends it on what appears to be good things. But if they left the money with us, we would put that money out in the economy as well, right? He talks about state sponsorship of the arts and conscription in the army and blah, blah, blah. It's a great essay. So great, in fact, that one of the seminal books of economics from which many people learn economics for the first time was inspired by this essay. That's Henry Hazlitt's great book, Economics in One Lesson. And there is, and opportunity cost applies to all of us. There is a lesson in this for writers as well. Like when I teach my writing course in my 4th webinar, I have this particular slide that you see. It almost always happens that when the immediate consequence is favorable, the later consequences are disastrous and vice versa. Right? Bastiat's words from this essay, that which is seen and that which is not seen. And what is he talking about? Like I tell my students, he's talking about Candy Crush, right? In the sense that you sit down to write one day and you say, 1 ghanta main likhunga, I'll write an essay, I'll do some deep work. But instead you say, let me play one game of Candy Crush before that, and you play that one game of Candy Crush, and then the whole hour goes you're playing Candy Crush, right? The immediate consequences, Bastiat would say, that which is seen is favorable. You're getting dopamine hits, you're relaxing. The later consequence, the second order effect, that which is not seen is disastrous. And what is that? That is the impact on your future self. Had you spent that hour reading or researching or whatever you were kind of going to do, your future self would have been smarter. The opportunity cost is that you made your future self stupider. You could have been doing this instead. So it's just a universal insight, and this is a beautiful thing that I find about Bastiat's writing in general, that in simple language in the middle of the 19th century, he is introducing all these great concepts to us like opportunity cost, which can help us live our lives better and think about the world better. So I love this essay deeply, and of course there used to be a prize for journalism named after him. A global sort of prize given to writers who promote the free society, quote unquote. So I was fortunate enough to win it twice in 2007 and 2015. I think Tim Harford is the only other person to get it twice. And it meant a lot to me, not only because the kind of the money that I got was useful for me at the time, and the validation is nice, it's always good to get a prize, but because it is Bastiat. And that kind of means a big deal. And in a sense, I look at Bastiat and I think that is a model public intellectual. That's a Renaissance man. He has interest over everything. There is no credentialism. He has not been to a great university and he is not part of the system. He is, in a sense, despite being an insider in many spaces, apparently, he's also an outsider to them because his ideas go against conventional thinking. And I just love the man so much. So Ajay, what's your recommendation for the day before the light goes?
A recommendation for today is Tyler Cowen's recent book, which is GOAT, which is the greatest of all time, where he has done a great job of pulling together the life and the ideas of many of the economists that we love and know well. And it's just a delight to read, particularly if you have not had exposure to Friedman and Hayek and Keynes and all that. This is an ideal starting point to get a hang of these people, and they are very interesting people and their ideas.
Tyler Cowen and Alex Tabarrok in their textbook on microeconomics also had that memorable line, a price is a signal wrapped in an incentive. Right, and it almost sums up the use of knowledge in society. And I want to come up with my recommendation right away, which is Marginal Revolution University. Check that out, because if you gentle readers are intrigued by the concepts of economics that we talk about, the price system, opportunity cost, and many more complicated things, the best way to understand them clearly is really Marginal Revolution University is a miracle in that sense. And it's really well done. I mean, they make their videos not with fancy production value or whatever. They basically record PowerPoints. So they will, and which anybody can do. It doesn't require anything. And the knowledge is brilliant, and both, Tyler and Alex has been on my show many times. Tyler's been there once. They're just brilliant people. Their blog, Marginal Revolution, is I think has been for 15 years the best blog in the world. I mean, obviously I'm deeply biased because, their ideas mean so much to me, and just a clear way in which they bring these important concepts to the public discourse is something that I find miraculous, and in their wide-ranging interests. For example, one of the ways I figure out sometimes, I've discovered great music and great novels, great literature, just through reading Tyler's annual recommendation notes, best books I read this year and all that. So in that sense, they are like, Renaissance people. Everything is everything. They're not in a silo, they're not specialists, and I really love that, and that's what we should all aspire to be, even if we can't get there. And gentle reader, don't worry, we're not going anywhere yet. I just want to share one final thought with you. Friedrich Bastiat is no more. Friedrich Hayek is no more. Milton Friedman is no more. We often speak of people of ages past. And I want to tell you that, people come and people go. People are not so important. Ideas are important. Ideas are what matters and what shapes civilization. So in that way, I hope you're enjoying the show. One day, Ajay and I will also be gone. But I hope that some of the things we speak about will leave a mark on you. In fact, why someday? We could be gone now.
Everything.
We are
Welcome
ready,
to-
guys. Don't be junior techs. You have to be quicker and faster. Set up the frame quickly.
I'm sorry, Vaishnav, the problem with your frame is you are in it. What do we do? Okay, now start. Rolling.
Welcome to our channel, Nothing is Nothing. We talk about how this world is not related to anything that happens in the world. Shall we begin, Vaishnav?
Yes, absolutely, we shall. Tell me what.
That's shocking. You can't make fun of me like that.
You should not be focusing on the sun.
So this little girl is very dangerous. Once you go below the surface, you understand that she's actually playing with us all the time.
That's true. That's true. One day we will all be gone. Let's go, Vaishnav.